Hello. And I know I always say this, like for those of you who have followed me from day one, but trust and believe, it is not easy out here in these streets, let me tell you. Oh my goodness. It's what you think you see just when I post and run, or listen, the messages that I get when people slide into my DMs, but then when I get people sliding in and giving me feedback, helpful hints, things that they think I should do differently or be mindful of considering who I am, my position, my influence, my platform, and they're not black. You know when you do just think, oh my God, like, give me strength. Do you know what I mean? Anyway, it's not even what I want to talk about, but people are still trying it. Still trying to gaslight, still trying to censor, still trying to put me back in my little corner. Still trying to make sure I don't push it too far so I don't upset people. Anyway, as I said, not even what I wanted to talk about. What I do want to talk about is to be mindful that whilst as black people, our stories, our experiences, our perspectives might have common themes, we are not the same. Our experiences are not the same. And I tell you why that's important, because when people who are not black, who are looking at this from like an outsider, right, they've got all this information going on in their heads, right, they're reading, they're listening, they're talking, they're reading and listening, they're talking, they're doing things internally, they're talking to their friends, they're talking to their neighbours, they're doing all of this stuff, assuming that there will be a finish line of understanding the black lived experience, how it shows up, and therefore the impact this systemic racism has had on certain individuals. Now, when you feel like you've had enough in every sense of the word, like you've heard enough, you're tired of hearing about Black Lives Matter, you're tired of hearing about black people be pokey and be like, you know, what's going on here and what's going on there. And I'll tell you why this came up, because I was having a conversation with somebody and I can't remember what we were talking about, and I think I went to give an example to highlight a point, and they stopped me dead and said, oh no, but I've heard this from somebody else, so no, it's all right, I get it, you don't need to explain it. The thing is, the point I was making was not about the point, it was about my experience, which is how the conversation started off in the first place. And I thought, there you go, right? Because you think that because you've heard a few stories and you've read a few things, you've listened to a few people, that you've now got the encyclopedic knowledge of black people. And therefore you go back to seeing us as one homogenous glob, which means what's affected one person must affect all of us in exactly the same way as it affected that person over there. So one of the things that I feel like I probably need to keep emphasizing, because I'm assuming people get that, is that common themes do not equal same stories. Do you know what I mean? And if you are trying to compartmentalize, because that's what we do as human beings, we're trying to make the complex simple, right? We're trying to squeeze it. Therefore, that's how we get into stereotype territory. By doing that, you take one trait from one individual and you apply it to everybody else who may share certain traits of that same person. That's what stereotyping is. And in this, if you feel like because you've held some sort of listening forum, listening circle, you've had one-to-ones with some of your black colleagues to understand some of their experience, so therefore you have now heard enough in terms of you no longer need to keep doing the listening, you no longer need to keep reaching out, keep engaging, keep checking in on colleagues who you know will be feeling a little for everything that's going on, then whilst you might be congratulating yourself that you've done that part, if you stop because you think it's an endpoint and it's now tipping into inconvenience territory for you, you're going back to being part of the problem. Because remember, one of the things about this is not every single individual within an organisation has felt seen and heard. So amplifying the voices of black people is not a one-time gig. It's not one and done. So it's not having one conversation and then that's it, because you feel like you've got enough. But this is a unique individual. This is their unique lived experience. This is so it goes back to, you know, when people say like, you've got to take people as you find them, you've got to respect and acknowledge their individual stories, and we have to do that for everybody. But in this, it's particularly important because if you don't, you go back to making assumptions, you go back to looking at the problem through your perspective, and or you appoint yourself as the saviour, come to save black people from ourselves. And you do that because you can stand up in a board meeting and say, well, I heard this story, this story, this story, this story, therefore X plus Y equals. And it doesn't work like that. So it always just rings little alarm bells for me when I hear people kind of like interrupt other black people. It's the equivalent of skim reading something and jumping to the end of the book because you feel like you've already read the book somewhere else. You haven't. You've just read the book that's written by another black author, so you're assuming all black people are the same, all black people experience racism in exactly the same way, it has the same effects on them, and. So this is just a reminder that common themes do not equal the same stories. And if you're getting to a point as a business where you feel like the listening stage was here and now you're moving on to this stage, I would say the listening stage has to be like a Gantt chart, has to run the whole way through every single thing that you're doing. Because there is no point elevating the voices of marginalised people because it suits you or because we're in a wider societal moment. And then when you feel like you can take a deep breath, or you're bored, fed up, or just overwhelmed because of other stuff, you close the door to that and carry on as normal, because we're going right back to where we were before this all kicked off. So think about it as one line, steady heartbeat running all the time. So you have to keep putting the energy and focus into making sure your employees feel heard in this particular context, but you should do that anyway. I would talk about that broadly anyway for everybody. But I make no apologies, and what I'm saying is you want to be focused on black people, because I have seen before, the second that we don't, and we bring everybody else in, because you know, what about this person, what about that person, what about that group that we haven't done, that gets diluted. Because again, it's very easy to talk about gender. To some extent, it's even easier to talk about sexual identity and sexual orientation to a point. It's always black that's always the most uncomfortable. So it's always the bit that people are so like desperate to move on from, you know? And hopefully I'll be back tomorrow feeling a bit more bright and breezy, but Lord have mercy, like people will they will try your patience, but you know what? We've got to keep going. We press on, we stay strong. So see you tomorrow.